The first time Elvis Presley saw the man who called himself Colonel Tom Parker, it was like meeting a force of nature. It was a few days after Elvis's 20th birthday, and the young singer, along with his bandmates Scotty Moore and Bill Black, were in Shreveport for the Louisiana hayride. The Colonel was a big, blunt man in his mid-40s, with a cigar perpetually lodged between his lips. He looked like he could bench press a truck and negotiate a deal with the devil himself. At first, Elvis thought Parker was just helping out their new manager, Bob Neal, by getting them some bookings. But as the days went by, it became clear that the Colonel had his own plans. Parker had a reputation. He was the kind of guy who could charm you one minute and intimidate you the next. Gossip around the hayride was that he had just been fired by Eddie Arnold, a singer he had managed for nearly a decade. The story was that there had been a falling out over money, and now Parker was in a new partnership with another country singer, Hank Snow, in a company called Jamboree Attractions. Whatever the truth, within a week, Elvis and his band were booked for a Hank Snow tour, playing in bigger venues than Scotty or Bob could ever have arranged. Parker even sent Elvis a check for $425 as an advance, more money than Elvis had ever seen in his life. Elvis was impressed. But Scotty and Bill, his loyal bandmates, didn't share his enthusiasm. They found Parker blunt and awkward, a man who cared more about money than music. DJ Fontana, the band's drummer, refused to call Parker Colonel, insisting on Mr. Parker instead. Sam Phillips, the owner of Sun Records, never called him anything but Tom Parker. Despite the band's reservations, Elvis was grateful. He saw the money rolling in and felt the Colonel's influence growing. The band's dynamic began to shift. Scotty and Bill were put on salary instead of getting their 25% share of the earnings. Parker talked non-stop about getting Elvis on television and out to Hollywood. Elvis knew his friends weren't happy, but they were making more money than ever before. Parker had a way of making people feel small, especially with his piercing blue eyes that could stare you into submission. He told Elvis that if he ever disgraced him, he'd be out. Elvis believed him, never questioning if Parker might be the lucky one. New York was their next stop, and it was a disaster. They flew there to audition for Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts television show, Elvis's first time on a plane. The excitement of the flight was short-lived when they didn't even make it past the audition. Elvis's acne was flaring up, and no amount of makeup could hide the craters on his face. The rejection stung, and Elvis felt a growing resentment toward the sophisticated East Coast folk. Back on the road, they played dates in Mississippi, Alabama, and Texas, with Elvis's new Lincoln car leading the way until Scotty drove it into a hay truck. The next car, a pink and black Cadillac, didn't fare much better, bursting into flames and burning out. Parker didn't hesitate to dock their pay when they were late for a gig, and Elvis didn't argue. Florida was Parker's territory, and in May 1955, they played at the Gator Bowl in Jacksonville. One night after their set, Elvis jokingly called out, "Okay, girls, I'll see y'all backstage." Hundreds of kids flooded the stage, leaving Hank Snow to play to a half-empty stadium. It was during this tour that Elvis met Mee Axton, a publicist who would help him bring his parents to see the ocean. Elvis's personal life was also in turmoil. When he returned to Memphis to record, his mother, Gladys, had a message for him. Dixie, the girl he had been in love with, was seeing someone else. She had been too scared to tell him herself, knowing he would try to talk her out of it. Emotionally, Elvis was shattered. He had always struggled with rejection, and this was no different. He mentioned Dixie in interviews for the next 2 years, even though he knew their relationship was over. On the road, the excitement of fame and the constant attention from fans made it hard to stay focused. One night, after taking a girl back to his hotel room, a condom burst. Panicked, Elvis rushed back to the lobby, where Scotty and Bill were waiting. "Well, you'll either have to marry the girl or leave the damned town real quick," Bill laughed, trying to lighten the mood. Elvis knew the Colonel would have a lot to say about that. But for now, he was just another part of the wild ride that was his life. The music, the fans, and the relentless drive to succeed were all part of the journey, and the Colonel was just getting started. Elvis took the girl to the hospital, where she was given a douche. The experience shook him, but he couldn't let it distract him. He was working hard to be Elvis Presley, listening to records by Ray Charles and Clyde McPhatter, trying to find that special magic in their singing. He planned his stage shows, chose his clothes, and talked to any small-town disc jockey who would listen. He drove thousands of miles a month, playing nearly 250 shows that year. He couldn't afford to make mistakes. His family depended on him. He had rented a new bungalow in Memphis for his parents, and he didn't want to let them down. Colonel Parker, his manager, had a lot to say about Elvis's life. He forbade any smutty talk on stage, even harmless routines that the audience loved. One of these involved Bill, Elvis's guitarist, pulling a pair of pink panties out of his jacket, which Elvis found funny, but Parker didn't, so the routine was gone. Parker started making all the non-musical decisions, and by the summer of 1955, he had become a special advisor to Bob Neal, Elvis's original manager. Parker grumbled that Sun Records was too small for Elvis, and he pushed for a bigger label. Offers started coming in from other record companies like MGM, Columbia, and Atlantic. RCA, where Parker had connections, was also interested. Sam Phillips, the owner of Sun Records, initially demanded $40,000 for Elvis's contract, a price too high for most companies. But Parker kept pushing, and eventually, RCA agreed to the deal. In October 1955, Parker asked Elvis's parents to sign a document giving him the right to negotiate a new record deal. Bob Neal, who was left out of the loop, was angry about Parker's tactics. Elvis watched the tension with mixed feelings. He knew Parker was helping his career, but he didn't like the bullying. Still, he was ambitious and didn't want to rock the boat. His father, Vernon, was happy about the increased pay per show, but his mother, Gladys, didn't trust Parker. She called him the devil and never felt comfortable around him. Parker tried to win her over by having Hank Snow, whose voice she loved, call her to vouch for him. But Gladys's instincts told her something was wrong. She felt that Elvis was selling his soul for fame and money. Elvis moved his parents to a bungalow, hoping it would make them happier, but Gladys's nerves only got worse. Her son's success had taken over their lives. The negotiations with Sam Phillips went on for weeks. Phillips was worried about Elvis's safety, especially after James Dean's death in a car crash. One night while they were recording in the studio, Sam got a phone call. When he came back, he told Elvis that he had agreed to sell his contract to RCA. Elvis was flattered but worried. Sam reassured him, telling him to let RCA know what he wanted and not let anyone tell him what to do. The deal was signed the following week. RCA paid $35,000 for Elvis's contract, and he got a 5% royalty on his records, a $5,000 advance, and a share in a music publishing company. Parker took a 25% commission and a share in the publishing. The Aberbach brothers, who backed Parker, also benefited from the deal. Elvis was thrilled, but he didn't realize that this deal would mean he would be under pressure to record songs he co-published, even if they weren't the best. Parker did well too, and he made sure Elvis never forgot the $5,000 option he had paid. Sam Phillips, though sad to let Elvis go, saw that he needed a bigger platform. He used the money to clear his debts and invest in a new hotel chain called Holiday Inn. He assured Elvis that he would always be there for him. For Elvis, the future looked exciting. He didn't realize that from then on, most decisions about his career would be based on their money-making potential. That December, Elvis went Christmas shopping in Memphis. People recognized him, but it was still a normal experience. He spent a lot of money buying clothes, equipment, and gifts for his parents. He shared Christmas with his fans by doing a long set on the hayride, but Parker sent a note to Bob Neal, telling him to make sure Elvis didn't make any vulgar gestures. Elvis found this annoying but decided to enjoy himself by singing Only You by the Platters, his favorite group. RCA flew Elvis to Nashville to introduce him to disc jockeys at a convention. He felt awkward at first, but he was relieved to see me Axton, a friendly face from earlier in the year. "Elvis, I want you to hear something," she said. "This is going to be your first hit on RCA." Elvis was nervous when Mee insisted he listen to a demo of a song she had written. The lyrics were inspired by a newspaper story about a man who left a note saying, "I walk a lonely street," before committing suicide. Suicide didn't seem like the subject for a hit, but when Elvis heard the song, he saw its potential. "Hot dog me, play it again," he said. He kept listening over and over, and the song stuck in his mind. He started singing it on the road, and by the time he and the band went to Nashville for their first RCA session, everyone knew Heartbreak Hotel. Elvis was worried about the new studio. It was a big, high-ceiled former church hall, very different from the cozy Sun studio. He missed Sam Phillips, who had a special way of recording that gave his sound a unique echo. This time there were new people in the studio, including Chet Atkins and Floyd Kramer. The engineers struggled to get the same sound, and Elvis felt constrained when they asked him to stand still while singing. He told producer Steve Scholes, "If I can't move, I can't sing." They set up extra microphones, and Elvis could finally sing and move freely. The first song they recorded was "I Got a Woman," a song they had played many times on tour. Despite their familiarity with it, Elvis kept moving off the microphone, and the engineers were frustrated. They eventually fixed the issue, and Elvis was able to perform. Chet Atkins was amazed by Elvis's energy and movement, and he called his wife to come see the session, saying she'd never see anything like it again. When they recorded Heartbreak Hotel, the sound was different from what they were used to. The RCA engineers couldn't replicate the slapback echo from Sun Studio, and the song sounded like Elvis was singing down a well. But with Floyd Kramer's piano break, Elvis knew they had something special. He was excited about the song, especially since he would have a share in the songwriting and publishing. Over the next couple of days, they recorded 5 songs. RCA was more efficient than Sun, and they didn't spend as much time on each track. Elvis and the band recorded "Money Honey," a fun song they loved to play, and a couple of new ballads. They also recorded "I Was the One," which Sam Phillips had refused to let them record at Sun. To loosen up before recording, Elvis sat at the piano and sang gospel hymns with the backup singers. This became a tradition for him at future sessions. After the sessions, Elvis felt good and returned to Memphis, where he sang at a Father's Day night at his old high school. In Nashville, however, Steve Scholes was unsure about the recordings. He sent the tapes to RCA executives in New York, and they didn't like Heartbreak Hotel. Sam Phillips also didn't like it, calling it a morbid, melodramatic mess. But Elvis believed in the song and ignored the critics. RCA eventually decided to release Heartbreak Hotel on the day before Elvis's first national TV appearance on CBS Stage Show. The show was produced by Jackie Gleason and the Dorsey brothers, who were surprised by Elvis's energy. Despite the producers' warnings to be restrained, Elvis couldn't help but move while singing, shake, rattle, and roll. The audience was initially subdued, but soon became excited. Jackie Gleason liked what he heard and suggested Elvis also perform "I Got a Woman." The next day, the phones at CBS were flooded with complaints about Elvis, but he was happy. Millions of Americans had seen him, and he was booked to return the following week. Steve Scholes wanted more recordings to fix what RCA saw as the Nashville disaster, so Elvis and the band went back to RCA New York studios. In New York, they recorded 8 tracks, including a cover of Carl Perkins's "Blue Suede Shoes." The song became a hit, especially in the UK and Canada. Elvis also recorded other rhythm and blues standards for his first album, Elvis Presley. The album cover featured a striking black and white photo of Elvis mid-performance, with his name in pink and green. The design was bold and provocative, and it generated a lot of attention. Elvis stayed in New York for a week, the longest he had ever been in the city. He called home every night to assure his mother, Gladys, that he was safe. New York was overwhelming with its noise and tall buildings, but the RCA and CBS staff were friendly and helpful. On his days off, Julian and Gene Aberbach, his music publishers, showed him around. They took him to dinner one evening, but the rare lamb on his plate made him uncomfortable. He preferred his food well cooked, and the incident made him feel out of place. For his second appearance on the stage show, Elvis was more confident but disappointed that Heartbreak Hotel wasn't selling. The producers wouldn't let him sing it, so he performed Baby Let's Play House and Tutti Frutti instead. After the show, the Dorsey brothers took the band to the Roseland Dance Club. When a woman from CBS invited Elvis to dance, he politely declined, saying he didn't know how to bop. The attention was growing, and he didn't want to make a fool of himself. Despite the challenges, Elvis was on the rise, and his career was about to take off. Elvis stood nervously, his face flushed with embarrassment. "I meant to say, I can't dance with anyone," he stuttered, feeling the Dorsey brothers' amused gazes. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, and now he was admitting he didn't dance either. It was a lot to take in for the band, but for Elvis, it was just another part of who he was. Jackie Gleason, a seasoned entertainer, stepped in with some wise words. "Elvis, you're going to be a very big star. Here's some advice. Don't hide. Walk the streets, go to restaurants, but don't hide, because if you do, you're going to be the loneliest guy in the world." Elvis listened, but his mind was also preoccupied with the telegram he had sent to his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. He told Parker that he was the most wonderful person he could ever hope to work with, that he would be loyal to him through thick and thin, and that he would do whatever it took to justify Parker's faith in him. He even said he loved him like a father. It was a heartfelt message, but it also showed how much Elvis valued Parker's guidance. Television was changing everything. After each appearance on Stage Show, there was a surge of ticket sales, not just for the show, but for the dates Elvis played in between. And it wasn't just white teenagers who were coming. Black fans were showing up too, even though they were usually only allowed in the balconies. Elvis had grown up with segregation, but he was starting to see that it didn't make sense. He didn't challenge it directly, though. Colonel Parker always reminded him that politics wasn't his job. So Elvis kept singing and performing, abiding by the rules even as his fame grew. The schedule was relentless. By Sunday afternoon, just 2 days after his second CBS appearance, Elvis was already in Richmond, Virginia, starting a 3-week tour down the East Coast. He and the band were on the road almost constantly, with only Saturdays off to fly back to New York for TV appearances. Church on Saturdays and Sundays had become entertainment, and the band was booked for matinees almost every Sunday. They only did 6 songs a show, but sometimes they did 4 shows a day. Elvis's on-stage energy was a revelation even to himself. "My whole body gets goosed up," he would explain. "It's like a surge of electricity going through me. I feel my heart is going to explode." Despite the excitement, Elvis sometimes wondered if all the hysteria might backfire. "I'll never make it," he worried one night after a show. "It will never happen. They're never gonna hear me because they're screaming all the time." But he got used to it, and Heartbreak Hotel finally hit the charts. On his 3rd stage show appearance, the CBS producers let him sing it, though they ruined it with a brassy arrangement by the Dorsey Band. Elvis thought it was awful, but just smiled and got through it. He made sure to tell Steve Scholes at RCA how he felt, and the big band arrangement wasn't used the following week. The constant travel meant Elvis's cousin, Gene Smith, was now helping Red on the road, while Vernon had built a trailer to carry the instruments and Elvis's outfits. Elvis realized that fans wanted a show as well as a performance, so he invested in flashy outfits. He learned this from watching Liberace on TV. Liberace was all about the glitter, but he could play the piano too. Elvis figured the same would apply to him. Those who didn't like his style would be dazzled by his presence, and forget to listen to his music. Vernon had given up his job to help Elvis with his personal business. He was now handling fan mail and other tasks that the Colonel didn't do. When the newspapers found out, they mocked Vernon, suggesting he was work-shy, but Elvis knew better. It made more sense to him that his father could earn in a day what he used to earn in a year. Vernon was proud of the trailer he built, even if Red said it looked like an ice cream van. During the first months of 1956, Elvis faced a new worry. He didn't feel he could talk to the Colonel about it, so he visited Sam Phillips, the only adult he trusted. "Mr. Phillips, can I ask you something in complete privacy?" Elvis asked. "Of course, Elvis. What's the problem?" Sam replied. "Well, Mr. Phillips, I believe I might have syphilis," Elvis said, his voice trembling. "I have the symptoms." Sam was taken aback. "You know what the symptoms are." "I read about them in a magazine," Elvis explained. "Why don't you see a doctor?" "I'm scared it will get out and be in the papers." Sam reassured Elvis about the Hippocratic Oath and suggested they visit a doctor. It turned out that Elvis had a carbuncle, not syphilis. Sam called a doctor at St. Joseph's Hospital, and they went in through a back entrance. Sam had always been more than just a record producer to Elvis, and his advice was missed as Elvis's fame grew. Elvis's first major purchase was a house for his parents. He bought a ranch-style, 7-room home on Audubon Drive, paying $22,500 in cash. It was a lot of money, But Elvis was proud to say the house had no mortgage. He could have bought his parents a house and moved out, but he never considered living anywhere else. To Elvis, his parents were home. When Elvis's parents moved in, he noticed that their old furniture didn't fit. It looked shabby, so he took them downtown and bought new furniture until the house was filled. He overdid it a bit, but he wanted to please them. His mother, Gladys, was grateful, but seemed more timid in the new house. She fretted about the neighbors when fans gathered outside. Elvis reassured her that she would get used to it, but he could see that she was struggling with the transition. Gladys's health was also a concern. She was still taking diet pills and drinking more. Elvis was worried when he had to leave, but he was glad his father could be with her. He didn't want her to be lonely in their new home. Elvis's final stage show appearance in New York was in late March. Heartbreak Hotel was high in all the charts, and his first album and EP were in the shops. CBS and RCA wanted him to sing Blue Suede Shoes, but Elvis couldn't do it. His friend Carl Perkins had been in a car accident and was in the hospital. Elvis sent a get well telegram and had Scotty DJ, and Bill visit Carl at the hospital. Instead of Blue Suede Shoes, Elvis performed Money Honey. After the show, Elvis flew to Los Angeles for a screen test with Hal Wallis at Paramount. He had always dreamed of being a movie star. Watching James Stewart and James Dean in films had inspired him. He wanted to be a serious actor, not just a singer in movies. Parker said he would pass the message on, but Elvis wasn't sure if anyone listened. Fame had come quickly, and Elvis was scared it could disappear just as fast. He tried to stay grounded, knowing right from wrong but aware of the traps that fame could bring. He was tired, often getting only a few hours of sleep, and relying on pills to stay awake. When he arrived in Los Angeles, he was too excited to sleep. He called home, feeling like a poor boy who had finally made it to the promised land. But he was no longer poor. He was Elvis Presley, and everything was about to change. Elvis's arrival in California was a lot quieter than what he was used to back in the South. His records were just starting to catch on there, and he didn't have the same kind of wild crowds that followed him around. But when he got to Paramount Studios the next day, things started to feel more familiar. Secretaries were buzzing around, whispering to each other and sneaking peeks at him. He didn't know much about movie stars, but he knew how to handle girls. It seemed like the secretaries had seen plenty of film stars, but Elvis was the first rock star they'd ever met. Hal Wallis, the producer, wanted Elvis to do a screen test to see if he could act. Elvis was worried about his stammer, but Hal told him it would just make him seem more natural. So Elvis tried his best to get into character and act naturally. He thought he did pretty well. But then Hal wanted to see how Elvis looked on screen when he was singing. They played him a recording of Blue Suede Shoes, gave him a fake guitar, and asked him to mime. Elvis didn't realize at the time that they were more interested in his singing than his acting. He just did what he was asked. A few days later, a newspaper reporter asked Elvis how the screen test went. He told her he was going to be in a movie called The Rainmaker. But the Colonel, his manager, soon told him that wasn't true. Instead, he'd signed a contract with Hal Wallis, but was immediately loaned out to 20th Century Fox for another movie. Elvis felt a bit like a rental car being passed from one studio to another. The Colonel also told him it was best not to talk to reporters, because they might twist his words. Elvis was getting a lot of attention, but not all of it was good. Some people accused him of being vulgar, and said his music was encouraging drug-taking and juvenile delinquency. Elvis couldn't understand why his music, which he thought was fun and healthy, was being attacked. Why should music contribute to juvenile delinquency? He asked one journalist. If people are going to be juvenile delinquents, they'll be juvenile delinquents if they listen to Mother Goose rhymes. He also hated it when someone called him Elvis the Pelvis, calling it the most stupid thing an adult person can say. Elvis knew that in the music business, success meant everyone wanted a piece of you. After a few shows in San Diego and an appearance on the Milton Berle Show, he and his band Scotty, Bill, and D.J. were heading back to Nashville to record more music, but their trip started with a scare. The pilot of their chartered plane got lost and ran low on fuel. They had to make an emergency landing, which was scary, but they all made it safely. When they took off again, the pilot asked Scotty to fly the plane while he looked for a map. Scotty froze, saying he didn't know how to fly. Just as Scotty took over, both engines cut out. For a moment, they thought it was the end. But the pilot managed to restart the engines, and they made it to Nashville. Elvis was shaken, and decided they'd take a commercial flight next time. When they got to the studio, things weren't much better. Chet Atkins, the producer, didn't seem to take Elvis seriously. The Jordanaires, a vocal quartet Elvis admired, were only partly there. Instead of the full group, only one Jordanaire, Gordon Stoker, joined the two other singers. Elvis was frustrated because he needed that extra voice for the harmony. The songs they had for him weren't great, but they did the best they could in the limited time RCA gave them. The single I Want You, I Need You, I Love You became a hit, but Elvis didn't feel it was his best work. He decided from then on that he would make all the decisions in the studio. One of Elvis's favorite memories from that time was jamming with Lowell Fulson, a blues singer he admired. After a show in Houston, they went to a club where Fulson was playing. Fulson invited them on stage, and Elvis was thrilled. Watching Scotty and Fulson play together was a special moment. The Colonel, Elvis's manager, was detail-oriented and usually got things right. But he made a mistake when he booked Elvis for a 2-week season at the New Frontier Hotel in Las Vegas. The audience was mostly middle-aged and older, and they didn't react to Elvis's music at all. Elvis felt out of place and tried to make jokes to win them over, but it didn't work. The Colonel told him not to make off-color jokes, but Elvis didn't think they were that bad. The audience laughed, but they didn't connect with his music. Elvis treated Las Vegas like a vacation, flirting with showgirls and riding bumper cars at the fair. He didn't work in Vegas again for 13 years. One positive thing that came out of Las Vegas was seeing Freddie and the Bellboys perform Hound Dog at the Sands Hotel. The song was originally a woman's song, but Freddie had changed it around. Elvis thought it would be perfect for his shows, and he started performing it as his closing number. The crowd went wild, and the screaming got louder and louder. But the criticism from newspapers and critics also intensified. They called Elvis morally degenerate, lewd, and vulgar. Elvis was only 21, and the abuse was getting to him. When a reporter followed him into a restaurant in Charlotte, North Carolina, he finally spoke out. He pointed out that other performers on the Milton Berle show were sexier than he was, and that the music he sang was something he learned from black musicians. "The colored folks have been singing and playing it just like I do now, man, for more years than I know," he said. "They played it like that in their shanties and juke joints, and nobody paid it no mind until I goosed it up." Elvis felt that his intensity and passion were being misunderstood. He was doing his best to put emotion into his music and entertain his fans. He thought the people who mocked him were also mocking the kids who loved his music. When he appeared on The Steve Allen Show, they made him wear a tuxedo and sing Hound Dog to a basset hound. It felt degrading, but he did it anyway. Elvis knew that rock and roll was a healthy, positive thing, and he believed in it, no matter what anyone said. Elvis knew Hound Dog was a hit from the reactions on the road. When they went into the New York RCA studio the day after the Steve Allen Show, he was confident, but it wasn't as easy as he thought. It took 31 takes to get it right. Elvis was in charge, and he wanted everything perfect. He and the band kept tweaking this and that, until the drums sounded like a machine gun. The Aberbach brothers brought another song, Don't Be Cruel, which Elvis recorded next. The Jordanaires, who were now part of his team, sang with him. Both Hound Dog and Don't Be Cruel were so good that they were released on the same record. Both songs hit #1, selling 5 million copies in the US alone. The fans adored him, no matter what the newspapers said. After the recording session, Elvis decided to take a train back to Memphis. He brought along a photographer, Alfred Wertheimer, who had been taking pictures of him for RCA. Elvis was so used to being photographed that he barely noticed the camera. Unfortunately, Wertheimer missed the moment when Elvis ran into Gene Vincent at Pennsylvania Station. Gene had a hit with Bebop Elula, and was quick to tell Elvis he hadn't copied him. Elvis didn't mind and went along with it, even though his family and band thought it sounded like him. Elvis slept through the night on the train and changed at Chattanooga. To avoid a big crowd, he got off the train early, grabbed his bags, and walked across the fields to get home. Girls had always been a part of Elvis's life. Some were serious, some not so much. Some were famous, but most were just pretty girls. He tried to stay friends with his ex-girlfriends and even kept in touch with Dixie, his old girlfriend. He took her for a ride on his motorbike during his break, making sure they got back early in case her new boyfriend called. One night, Elvis went to a Blackwood Brothers gospel meeting and joined them on stage. His manager, Colonel Parker, was upset. He told Elvis he shouldn't sing without a contract and getting paid. Elvis understood and never did it again. Instead, he spent his month off relaxing, water skiing, horse riding, and visiting relatives. Vernon was thrilled with their new life, with multiple cars outside their house. He joked that it looked like a Presley used car lot. Gladys, however, was still in disbelief. She kept saying, "I can't believe it, I really can't." When the month was over, Elvis went back on the road. In Florida, a judge put police deputies on stage to arrest him if he moved any part of his body except his little finger. He just moved his little finger and the girls still went wild. Next, Elvis headed to Hollywood to make a movie. Love Me Tender was originally called The Reno Brothers, a cheap western. When Elvis joined, the script was rewritten, and 4 new songs were added. The tune to Love Me Tender was an old Civil War song, Ora Lee. The lyrics were written by Ken Darby and Vera Mattson, with Elvis listed as a co-writer, though he hadn't written anything. He later admitted it was a hoax and asked for it to stop. Elvis recorded the songs with Scotty, Bill, and D.J., but the producers thought they weren't hillbilly enough. They brought in local session musicians. Love Me Tender became a hit and Elvis was pleased. It was a quiet song, and he sang it softly, which made it work. During the movie shoot, Elvis met Deborah Paget and Dennis Hopper. He was a fan of James Dean and quoted Dean's dialogue to Natalie Wood, though she might not have been impressed. Despite his small part, Elvis's name and image were all over the poster. While in Hollywood, Elvis recorded his second album of the year. RCA wanted to flood the market with his record. On the same day, 7 more singles were released, giving him 9 records in the Hot 100. He missed out on Don't Forbid Me, which Pat Boone recorded instead. Elvis liked Boone's version, but wished he'd heard the song first. Elvis appeared on Ed Sullivan's show, which got the most viewers in TV history. He also performed in Tupelo, Mississippi, at the Mississippi-Alabama Fair and Dairy Show. It was a special day with a parade and reporters from all over. The mayor declared it Elvis Presley Day. Elvis put on a great show, but the girls rushed the stage during his evening performance. The National Guard had to help him escape through a trapdoor. Encores were no longer possible after his shows. Gladys hadn't been to many of Elvis's shows lately, and she was shocked by how wild the fans had become. She was worried that one day, someone might hurt him. She often told him, "Elvis, the Colonel is going to work you to your death. It ain't right." Elvis didn't complain, though. He told reporters, "The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. I might be herding sheep next year." He meant it in a way. He couldn't believe his success, so he always said yes to work, and the Colonel made sure there was always more. After a show in Tupelo, Elvis was off to Los Angeles to get his teeth capped again. His parents couldn't afford braces when he was young, but now as a movie star he needed a perfect smile. He would brush his teeth many times a day, making sure they stayed perfect. Next he went back to the studio to add more lines to the song, Love Me Tender. The movie's preview had upset some fans, because his character died at the end. So they decided to show his ghost singing over the end credits to reassure everyone. Then it was off to Texas for a short tour and up to New York for another appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. This time, Sullivan was friendly and even shook Elvis's hand. The ratings went up, and TV people quickly changed their minds about him. After the show, Elvis was photographed getting a polio vaccine, and many kids followed suit. Within 6 months, 84% of the U.S. child population had been vaccinated. Back in Memphis, Elvis met Natalie Wood at the airport. She was a famous actress, and Elvis was flattered she came all the way from California to see him. He showed her off, taking her to Guthrie Park to play football with his friends, and riding her around town on his Harley-Davidson. He joked with his friends, "Imagine, a Memphis boy with Natalie Wood sitting behind me on my motorbike. Natalie's visit was short. She left after 3 days, and everyone was a bit relieved. She was from a different world, and Elvis's parents, especially Gladys, weren't exactly impressed with how she dressed around the house. The fans waiting outside were glad to see her go, too. They didn't like sharing Elvis, especially with someone so famous. Even the closest families have their tensions. Gladys could be loud when she got mad, and Vernon would just hang his head. Elvis was sure the fans outside could hear her sometimes. Vernon would often scold Elvis about his spending, treating him like a child. One day, Elvis and his cousin Harold bought some guitar picks. Vernon went on about how Elvis was wasting money. Elvis finally got angry and said, "Daddy, you took care of me and Mama when I was little, and now it's my turn to take care of you. If I want a guitar pick, I'll buy one. It's my money and it's none of your business." Vernon didn't argue that night, but he still worried about Elvis's spending. In the fall of 1956, the big event was the release of Love Me Tender. Elvis watched it a few times in Memphis, going in late and leaving early to avoid the fans. He thought he did okay, but the critics were harsh. Some called him a 172-pound sausage, and said his voice sounded like a rusty foghorn. It hurt, especially since it was in the Los Angeles Times, where everyone in the film industry would see it. Elvis realized he had a lot to learn about acting. After a busy year, Elvis finally got a break. He went home but didn't know what to do with himself. One day, he was driving down Union Avenue in his new Cadillac with a girl he met in Las Vegas. He saw a row of colorful Cadillacs outside Sun Records and decided to stop in. Carl Perkins and Jerry Lee Lewis were there, and they all started jamming together. Sam Phillips called Johnny Cash, and a photographer took their picture. For a few hours, Elvis felt like he was just one of the gang again, not a famous star. Elvis had a lot to think about on the way home. Fame was sweet, but it also felt like a jail. He was rich and adored, but he couldn't live a normal life anymore. He was supporting his parents just like he promised, but he couldn't be invisible. Sometimes it was hard not to want to hide. Just a couple of weeks earlier, a fan at a gas station had made things turn ugly, and Elvis had to defend himself. "It was either hit or be hit," he said. "I can take care of myself too." Elvis and his family had a wonderful Christmas at their new home on Audubon Drive. They decorated a big white nylon Christmas tree with lots of lights, and enjoyed a feast with plenty of presents. Dottie Harmony, a dancer Elvis met in Las Vegas, joined them, but this made some of his other girlfriends, June and Barbara, upset. Elvis was always falling in love, or so he said, but many of these relationships were just crushes. He was a gentleman, and he respected the girls who didn't want to go further. He even hoped to marry a virgin one day, but the good times were tinged with worry. The draft was looming, and being classified 1A meant he could be called up anytime. Elvis prayed, "Please God, not yet." The Colonel, his manager, was already planning Elvis's next big move, movies. This meant no more free appearances on TV. So Elvis made his last trip to New York for the Ed Sullivan Show. Fans lined the train route, and the streets around the studio were packed. Ed Sullivan, who had once criticized Elvis, now praised him as a real decent, fine boy. Back in Memphis, the situation at Audubon Drive was getting tense. Fans turned up in droves, blocking the roads and tearing up the lawn for souvenirs. The neighbors were annoyed, and some even talked about a petition to make the Presleys move out. Gladys, who had always been welcoming, was deeply hurt. One day, Elvis overheard her on the phone saying, "I wish we was poor again, I really do." It broke his heart. Elvis decided they needed a new home where they could live in peace. On his 22nd birthday, Elvis and his band took the train to Los Angeles to start his second movie. The producer, Hal Wallis, wanted the character to be as much like Elvis as possible. The songs were better this time, including "Loving You," which became the film's title. At first, recording in a soundstage was a struggle, but Wallis let Elvis and the band work their way, improvising and trying different approaches. Elvis met Dudley Brooks, a talented pianist, who became a key part of his Hollywood recordings. Elvis's hair, once his crowning glory, was now dyed black for the Technicolor film. He looked different, but it was part of the image that made him famous. He knew he had to look a certain way to keep his fans happy, and that meant his appearance would stay the same for years to come. Despite the challenges, Elvis was still Elvis. He was a star, but he was also a son who loved his parents and a performer who loved his music. As he moved forward, he carried the memories of those early days, the joy and the struggles, always hoping for a place where he could just be himself.